an Asian household, a plastic bag inside multiple different plastic bags. We're talking today about sustainability and greenwashing and why companies want to look and perform sustainability. Hi, my name is Kiana from the Araw project. This is episode 2 of Share Screen, and I'm really excited to talk to you today about the idea of greenwashing, why it works, why it exists. But I want to start with one specific word, and it's this one right here: convenience. In recent years, there has been this idea around sustainability that sustainability is inconvenient. And I get it, it makes sense in a way. Sustainability is often repackaged, just like in greenwashing, but even in meaningful sustainable action, sometimes we try to make things sexy. And that's true with sustainability, right? If you want a healthier, plant based, environmental alternative to your food, maybe you go to this trendy salad juice bar. And if you want an alternative to your fast fashion, you go to these, locally made, ethically made small businesses. And when you want to have a alternative to your usual car or Grab or Uber, you try to walk or use public transportation, and all of that is great. But public transportation, at least in the Philippines, is a lot of the times inconvenient, and people would rather take Grab or Uber or public or private cars if they have the means to. These juice bars and salad places and healthy alternatives and small businesses are very expensive. Whether you want to admit it or not, a lot of these things are not actually accessible to the regular, common Filipino person, including myself. There are so many times where I would love to support these local sustainable brands, but unfortunately, I cannot afford to shell out 2,000 pesos for a headband or a top. And that's okay. That doesn't make you not sustainable. But I also want to address the fact that this marketplace, this branding of what it means to be an environmentalist, is not all that sustainability is. And I want to root that in pre-colonial Philippines and pre-colonization all throughout the world, right? Before many countries were colonized, but we'll talk about in the Philippine context, before we were colonized, right, we didn't have to go to these special places to get healthy food. We were farmers. That was the lifeblood. That was the history. That was the daily practice. And so we were already eating sustainable food. We were doing it in sustainable ways. We were planting and foraging and creating lives for ourselves that didn't depend on big businesses or plastic or fossil fuels. But of course, development happens. And with that development, a lot of things change, right? We no longer have the ability to walk freely in a lot of different roads because of the car centricity of the Philippines, and I'm sure a lot of different countries. We are stuck in a loop of constantly having to take these public transportation systems that were not planned with people in mind and tire ourselves out, right? We buy these sustainable products because the manufacturing processes that were initially sustainable changed with the Industrial Revolution, changed to make things easier. But mainly, it wasn't just to make things easier, it was to make things efficient. And by efficient, I mean profitable. This is where we really get to the bulk of going beyond sustainability and going towards greenwashing, right? But before we do that, I want to misspell an idea that might come up in the comments or just in your minds, right? Pre-colonization was in the past. What about now? How are we sustainable now? How is sustainable not inconvenient and expensive now? And I want you to think about the things you did naturally that were essentially sustainable practices. And this goes back to my intro, right? A lot of Asian households, including my own, we had plastic bags stored in a plastic bag. I have one right there on my door of my dorm. And it's simple, right? We didn't want to throw these away because we could still use them. And that in itself is sustainability in practice. When we go to secondhand clothing stores or thrift shops to save money, that's sustainability. When we reuse our old containers even though they're yellowed, that is sustainability. When we repair things instead of throwing them away, whether or not it's because we cannot afford a new one, it is sustainability. And so the low income, the rural areas, the small communities of our countries are actually the most sustainable. And if that doesn't prove that sustainability is accessible, I don't know what will. Sustainability doesn't have to look picture perfect and how it's depicted in social media. Sustainability can look like walking, even when maybe it's a bit dangerous. It can look like asking your neighbor for a tablespoon of salt because that's all you needed, instead of buying a whole new bag because you didn't have access to community. So, on to greenwashing, right? This is what the video is all about. And I want to start by saying, yes, sustainability is natural. It's second nature in small systems, in communities, in households, in individual lives. But when these systems zoom out, when we look at things from a macro's perspective, sustainability doesn't seem as easy anymore. I want to define greenwashing if you haven't heard of it. So, greenwashing is basically where companies, governments, initiatives claim to be environmentally friendly to get public approval, but behind closed doors don't actually address the things they want to address and don't actually put their money where their mouth is, unfortunately. And this is a phenomenon that has been growing in the past years, and it's growing because the need is there. There is a market for sustainability, and young people want to invest in products that are made ethically and with the planet in mind. So, why are they just pretending? Why are companies performing sustainability instead of actually doing it in practice? And the answer, I think, is very simple if we look at it in a very clear-cut way, right? They are not sustainable because it's hard. Sustainability is hard in macro levels, not because it's difficult to hire someone to do things sustainably, not because it's difficult to do the processes we did before, but because it's no longer as efficient and therefore no longer as profitable. Systems make it so that sustainability is not rewarded. When we look at how late-stage capitalism kind of functions, we see that it's much easier to make a lot of money if, let's say, instead of using a glass or a sustainable packaging, you just use plastic because plastic is dirt cheap. And so your profit margins are bigger. And even in the case of ethicality, right? It is much easier to pay your workers less and make more than pay your workers a living wage. Unfortunately, the systems reward bad behavior, which is a big part, in my opinion, of why greenwashing persists so vigorously, with such a passion, with such a fire. But I also want to turn the attention back to the fact that there's a difference, right? Before we were talking about small systems and now we're talking about bigger systems. And when we transition to bigger systems, we have to zoom out. We have to disconnect. We have to disconnect from a lot of the communities of the impacts of our work. You're no longer seeing in person the communities that you're affecting. You're far away. You're 5 people of supply chain away from the communities that you're affecting, and so you have the privilege of distance. And with the privilege of distance comes the privilege of profit. Handmade, circular and community systems are difficult to scale and monetize. which is why greenwashing persists. It's much more profitable to perform sustainability and get that public approval and get the youth vote than to be sustainable in practice. I want to give some very specific examples just so that we have a better understanding of what greenwashing looks like. So let's look at the National Greening Program of the Philippines. This is actually not a company, it's a government initiative, which is why I wanted to start here. I want to start by kind of breaking the walls of what greenwashing can be. Greenwashing isn't just when companies do this, it's when claims are made of being environmentally friendly and environmentally rooted without the actual work behind it. Now, with this national greening program or national greenwashing program, right, there was an initial investment of 2.39 billion pesos. I repeat, 2.39 billion pesos by President BBM. Sometimes I think we throw words like billion and million around without realizing just how big a billion is. 2.3 billion could help you live lavishly for multiple lifetimes. And yet, the National Greening Program replaces community and indigenous forests with plantations of invasive species. So when you have this big budget and you want to plant trees, why on earth are we planting invasive species that will end up killing the trees that are already there? Is it because the government didn't research? Maybe. Did they not have people on the team that knew what invasive means? I'm not 100% sure. But I will give you a quotation from a enforcer that actually worked on the ground in Palawan, which is from this article from the Philippine Center of Investigative Journalism. He says, "To give way to one planted tree, they will remove 3." Dr. Seuss in the house with that one. But see, they're claiming to be sustainable, ruining the environment. That is exactly what greenwashing is. But if we look at it from the framework that we talked about earlier, right, on a small scale, it would be much easier to plant a native tree. Why? Because we probably wouldn't have access to mahogany or Melina, which is the other tree that they planted in Palawan in this program. We wouldn't have access to that. We would have taken the trees that already existed, find ways to propagate them, and planted them in the ways that we knew from indigenous knowledge and that local community experience, right? And these communities still exist. They easily could have been reached out to, and their collaboration could have easily been integrated into this project. But here we are, using mahogany and other invasive species in the name of speed, cost, and economic returns. And I want to really key in on that speed and economic return, right? They did this because technically these invasive species grow faster. Unfortunately, when they do, they kill these species around them that are actually native and better for local environments. This specific case, and I'm going to be reflective here for a moment, this specific case makes me very sad because it is a testament to no matter how much funding we put into the environment, into doing the right thing, without the proper people on the projects, without the proper outlook, without the proper research, without that process that cares for not only planet but people, things will not persist in the way that we want them to. And I think that's really what stands out to me about this. Now I want to give another example that's more global and a little bit more positive. In my points of discussion here, I called it "When We Stop Greenwashing." So what's an example when there was greenwashing and it got shut down? I think this is a nice place to kind of start ending the video because it gives us a bit of a positive perspective. So Lloyd's Bank advert banned for making false environmental claims. Let's look at the advert really quickly. So this is what it looked like. helping Britain prosper. So basically, so here we go. It gave the general impression that renewable energy formed a significant proportion of Lloyd's investments and companies it financed. Now, the ASA, or basically the institution, the association that looks at advertisements in the UK, said, "We considered that meant, despite the impression given, the ad, Lloyd's was continuing to significantly finance business and industries that emitted notable levels of carbon dioxide and other GHGs." The last line here, "That was material information that was likely to affect consumers' understanding of the ad, overall message, and so should have been made clear." The watchdog said Lloyd had to ensure that future environmental claims did not mislead the public or exclude significant information, would put the claims into context that helped with consumer understanding of the message. I kind of butchered that, but essentially, right, we're talking about this bank. They had this idea, we're going to put an ad out that says we're going to help Britain prosper by investing in renewables, when in reality, they were mainly investing in extractive and destructive industries. And so that ad made it seem like they were doing things they weren't. And luckily, the association completely shut that down, which is really a success story in terms of looking out for greenwashing. And obviously, any person that talks about greenwashing has to go through the whole do your research when you look at ads and things like that. But I want to end this video on the note of saying the fact that greenwashing exists is a good sign. It means that we have the power to influence companies, right? And granted, they're not doing it the right way, but the fact that they need to greenwash, the fact that they need to even pretend to be environmentally friendly to gain our approval, means one thing. We've made it clear what we want. We've made it clear that young people want environmental reform, want sustainably made products, and want things that are made with people and planet in mind. And that, to me, is a win. But there are much more wins that need to be won, and to me, my call to action at the end of this video is that people are genuinely passionate and care about this issue. Companies had to adapt and market towards this passion and care. Now it's time to demand that they put their money where their mouth is. Thank you so much for watching. I have my references over here in the comments. I will also put it in the description, but I have it over here. And thank you so much for watching this video. I forgot to do this last video, but yay! Thank you for making it to the end if you did. And I want to share our sponsor for today's video. JK, this is my second video on YouTube. I obviously don't have a sponsor. However, there's been a recent calamity in the Philippines, and Mindanao was affected by a 7.8 magnitude earthquake between General Santos City and Sarangani Province. If you could donate to the Consortium for People's Development, they are raising money to help support these affected survivors and families from Mindanao. The Araw project, which this YouTube channel is made for, will also be working with the Consortium for People's Development to help raise funds. So I hope if you have extra money that is spending for not necessary purposes, maybe you could donate them. That would be absolutely amazing. We would super appreciate it. And this is much less important, but if you could comment your thoughts on this video, it would mean the world to me. I really did enjoy commenting and reading the comments on the last video. It made me so incredibly happy. And thank you so much for watching the second episode of Screen Share. I am so happy to have you here. Comment, share, subscribe. I don't know what the outro is, but stay sustainable, stay community oriented, and stay cool. Peace.